This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas.
All right, everyone get ready, because today we're going deep into visceral fat.
Yeah.
You know, that stuff everyone's always warning you about. But what if I told you there was so much more to it than just visceral fat is bad?
Oh, there definitely is. This isn't just about how much you have, but also what proportion it makes up of your total abdominal fat. And get this, those two things can tell very different stories about your health.
I am already so intrigued. We have got a fascinating new study published in BMC Medicine, and they used MRI data from over 500 people. And let me tell you, it challenges some of the usual assumptions about how we even understand visceral fat. Are we ready to unpack this?
Absolutely.
Okay, so before we get too deep into the weeds, let's just do a super quick Visceral Fat 101. We know it's not the good kind of fat, but what makes it so different from the fat on our arms or legs?
Well, it's all about location.
Yeah.
Locations. Think of visceral fat as that sneaky fat that's surrounding your organs deep inside your abdomen. It's not just sitting there. It's metabolically active, churning out inflammatory substances that can really wreak havoc on your body.
Okay, that paints a pretty vivid picture. So this BMC Medicine study, this isn't just some small experiment, right?
No, not at all. This study was based on two 18-month lifestyle intervention trials. They called them Central and Direct Plus, with a whopping 572 participants. And instead of relying on simple measures like BMI, they used MRI to get a precise look at how much visceral fat each person had.
Wow, MRI. That's serious stuff. That must have given them some pretty solid data to work with.
Definitely. And here's the kicker. They didn't just look at the total amount of visceral fat, which they called VAT area. They also looked at the proportion of visceral fat compared to total abdominal fat, and they called this VAT proportion.
VA area and VAT proportion. Two different ways of looking at the same thing. I'm guessing that's where things started to get really interesting.
You bet at the start of the study, both VAT area and VA proportion were linked to metabolic issues like high blood pressure and diabetes. But here's where it gets really fascinating.
Oh, I love the butts. Those are always where the real gems are hidden.
Yeah.
Spill it.
Well, they found that VAT proportion was a much better predictor of high triglycerides, which, are those fats that float around in your blood and can be a real troublemaker for your heart health.
Hold on, really? The proportion was more important than the total amount when it came to triglycerides? That's kind of mind-blowing. Have you ever thought about what your triglyceride levels are?
It's not something most people consider, but it's definitely worth thinking about. And what's even more interesting is that VAT area, that total amount of visceral fat, was more strongly linked to inflammation in the body.
Okay, so more visceral fat, more inflammation, that makes sense. But why would the proportion be more important for triglycerides? It seems counterintuitive.
Right. It seems like more fat should equal more problems across the board. But think about it this way. Maybe a higher VA proportion reflects how efficiently your body is storing fat. If your visceral fat cells are like little sponges soaking up triglycerides from your blood, then the proportion might be a better indicator of what's going on at a cellular level.
Okay, now that's starting to make sense. So it's not just about how much fat you have. It's about how your body is handling. It seems like we need to look beyond simple measures like BMI and dig a little deeper.
Absolutely. And this study really highlights how important it is to understand the nuances of body fat.
Okay, so we've established that VAT proportion and VAT area, they're not just interchangeable terms. They give us different pieces of the puzzle when it comes to our metabolic health. But how does this actually play out in real life? I mean, can we even change these things?
That is the million-dollar question. And luckily, this study gives us some clues. Remember those two trials? They based this on Central and Direct. Plus, they weren't just sitting around measuring fat. They actually put people on different diets to see what would happen.
Oh, right. So we have Central looking at low-fat versus Mediterranean or low-carb diets, and then Direct Plus comparing a standard healthy diet to Mediterranean and green Mediterranean diets. And they were all doing some physical activity too, right?
Right. Exactly. And get this, they provided lunch at the workplace cafeteria tailored to each person's diet. Talk about taking the guesswork out of healthy eating.
Seriously, I wish my work cafeteria was that helpful. But okay, back to the results. What happened to their visceral fat?
Well, both trials were designed to promote moderate, sustainable weight loss over those 18 months. They emphasized limiting processed foods, trans fats, and refined carbs while bumping up those veggies. And, across the board, they saw significant decreases in both VAT area and VAT proportion.
So regardless of the specific diet, just making those overall healthier choices had a positive impact that's encouraging. I mean, it suggests that we have some control over this, right?
Absolutely. And remember, we're not just talking about weight loss here. These changes in visceral fat were linked to improvements in cholesterol levels, blood sugar control, even hormone balance. It's about getting healthier on the inside, not just shrinking your waistline.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But I'm also curious about those prediction models they developed. It sounds like they were able to estimate someone's visceral fat pretty accurately using some basic information.
Oh, those models are fascinating for VAT area. The best model combined things like waist circumference, blood pressure, and blood markers like HbA1c and triglycerides.
So they're taking into account different aspects of your health, not just one measurement makes sense. But wait, didn't you say that the VAT proportion model was even more interesting?
They could actually predict your VA proportion without taking any body measurements. It relied on factors like age, sex, and blood markers like ALT ferritin and
Right.
leptin.
Wait, so a simple blood test could potentially tell you about your risk for metabolic disease based on your VAT proportion. That seems like something out of a sci-fi movie.
I know, right? It's incredible. And it really points towards the future of personalized medicine. Imagine a world where we can get this kind of detailed information from a routine checkup and use it to make truly individualized health decisions.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
But for now, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What should they be thinking about after diving into all this visceral fat research?
I think the biggest takeaway is that visceral fat is a serious player in our metabolic health. It's not just about aesthetics, it's about reducing our risk for a whole host of health problems.
And the good news is we can do something about it. Even moderate lifestyle changes like eating more whole foods and getting regular exercise can have a significant impact.
Exactly. And don't get discouraged if you don't see results overnight. Remember those trials we talked about? They lasted 18 months. Sustainable change takes time and consistency.
That's a great point. It's not about quick fixes or fad diets. It's about creating healthy habits for the long haul. But what about those of us who are already pretty health conscious? Is there anything new here for us?
I think this study really emphasizes the importance of personalization. What works for one person might not be the best approach for another. And as we learn more about the nuances of body fat, we can move away from generic advice and towards truly individualized recommendations.
I love that it's about empowering ourselves with knowledge and working with our healthcare providers to find the best path forward. It's funny, we often think about fat loss as like this straightforward equation.
Jeez.
Eat less, move more, and the pounds will just melt away. But this deep dive into visceral fat has really shown just how complex this issue is.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all situation. And this BMC Medicine study is a perfect example of how we're moving beyond those, like, simplistic views of body fat. Remember that surprising connection we talked about between ET proportion and triglycerides?
Oh yeah, that would really threw me for a loop. It seems so counterintuitive that the proportion of visceral fat would be more important than the total amount when it came to those like pesky blood fats.
Right. You'd think more fat would equal more problems across the board, but the researchers had some interesting theories about why VA proportion might be so closely linked to triglycerides.
Do tell, I'm all ears.
Well, they suggested that VAT proportion might actually reflect how efficiently your body stores and releases fat. Like if your visceral fat cells are really good at grabbing triglycerides from your bloodstream and holding on to them, that could explain why a higher proportion is linked to elevated triglyceride levels.
So it's not just about how much visceral fat you have, it's about how it's behaving, how active it is in storing those fats. That's a fascinating perspective. It makes you wonder if there are ways to influence that fat storage process.
Exactly. And that's where personalized approaches become so important. It's not enough to just say lose weight. We need to understand the individual factors that contribute to someone's unique metabolic profile.
Speaking of personalization, I was really impressed by the fact that they developed separate prediction models for men and women in this study. It acknowledges that we're not all built the same, and our bodies can respond differently to the same stimuli.
Absolutely. Men and women tend to store fat differently, and those hormonal differences can play a huge role in how our bodies metabolize food and regulate those key metabolic processes.
It makes you wonder, what if in the future we could use these kinds of models to predict not just our current risk, but also how we might respond to different interventions? Imagine your doctor saying, based on your unique profile, a Mediterranean diet combined with strength training would likely be the most effective approach for you.
Wouldn't that be amazing? It would take all the guesswork out of it and allow us to really take control of our health.
It feels like we're on the cusp of a revolution in personalized medicine. And this research on visceral fat is a great example of that.
It's definitely an exciting time to be in the health and wellness space.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the final takeaway for our listeners? What's the one thing they should remember about visceral fat?
I think the biggest takeaway is that knowledge is power. The more we understand about how our bodies work, the better equipped we are to make informed decisions about our health.
I couldn't agree more. This isn't about obsessing over every gram of fat, but about empowering ourselves to make choices that support our long-term well-being.
Exactly. Talk to your doctor, ask questions, and don't be afraid to advocate for yourself.
And remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg. As science continues to explore the complexities of body fat, we'll undoubtedly uncover even more insights that can help us live healthier, happier lives.
Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.
And that concludes our deep dive into the fascinating world of visceral fat. We hope you enjoyed the journey and learned something new along the way. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a cutting-edge topic, so stay tuned. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other podcasts, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.